Hey again, juniors and seniors, you're taking the AP. You have viewed a few of these quick instructional videos. We covered an overview of the exam in the multiple choice section, the base of the AP review in the first video. I looked at scoring guidelines with you in the second video. The third one took you through the poetry prompt, the first of the three essay prompts, also called the free response section. And this video is going to talk to you about the prose prompt. I think a lot of you might feel a little more comfortable with prose, right? Given that a lot of you have read novels and plays, and for whatever reason, students often are intimidated, not all, but students can be a little bit intimidated by poetry. Anyway, this is the prose prompt. They're going to take out a section from a novel or a play, and they're going to have a particular prompt for you, and you're going to have to respond to it. You don't have to have read the play. They're not expecting you to have read whatever novel or play their excerpt is from. That's not what it's about. The prompt will guide you, and it's a self-contained little piece that you're going to be analyzing, right? All right, so that in mind, let's go to our AP Lit section in our OneNote. Let's do that. You've been here before, right? This Lit AP exam resources, which you will find again in the content library of your English class, OneNote. And we are going here to workshop number 3, the prose prompt. And we're going to walk you through the 2 subpages here. The recent prose prompts, a breakdown of what you can expect in the prose prompt. And then second subpage, the work you'll need to do to prepare in advance of the workshop. Let's break it down. All right, you recall that I did this for the poetry section. I thought we would do the same thing for the prose section. We have 3 samples, 2018, 17, and 16, the prose prompts. And we're going to go through them one at a time. Here's the first one, the 2018 one. What they asked from students. There's the prompt, and I put it up here so that I can highlight some things for us as we go through. So first of all, right, let's take a look at the prompt. The following interchange, excerpted from an 1852 novel by Nathaniel Hawthorne, occurs when 2 characters who have been living on the Blythedale farm, a community designed to promote an ideal of equality achieved through communal rural living, are about to part ways. Note that, they give you some background. That's all you need to know, nothing more. Read the passage carefully. In a well-written essay, analyze how Hawthorne portrays the narrator's attitude towards Zenobia through the use of literary techniques. Okay, let's break this down a little bit, right? First of all, I draw your attention to this ever important word, right? How. What does how mean? How means techniques. How means devices. How means literary elements or textual elements. All those things are synonymous, right? And notice, sometimes they're going to list the kinds of techniques you should use, but sometimes they're going to do this. They are just going to say, through the use of literary techniques. You're like, what techniques? They're leaving it up to you. You're going to look at 2 or 3 different techniques, right? And talk about how those techniques suggest this, right? How Hawthorne portrays the author's attitude toward Zenobia. That's what you're focusing on. That's what your argument revolves around, right? So once again, let's take a look here. Structural model for a thesis, right? Again, you've seen this from English teachers before, right? Through whatever techniques you're going to examine, whatever those might be, Hawthorne illustrates, you could say the passage illustrates, the novel illustrates, right? Or you can list the author, whichever. Hawthorne illustrates what you pinpoint as the narrator's attitude towards Zenobia. Don't say Hawthorne illustrates the narrator's attitude towards Zenobia, because then you're gonna miss the boat. They're gonna say, oh, you didn't define what we're asking you to define, right? You just put that placeholder in, right? You need to define that very, very clearly, right? So what might that look like, right? Let's take a look at this. Here's the thesis of a student who scored a 7. That's an upper mid-range, right? 6 and 7 is upper mid-range. Upper level essays are 7 and 8, right? So this is an above average essay. It's just not the very top of the line per se, right? And note that this student used 2 sentences rather than 1, right? Oh, excuse me, that should not be there. That was from a previous, let me fix that right now. Let's take a look at the thesis, right? With a first-person perspective, lavish imagery, and probing dialogue, the prose establishes the narrator's initial bewilderment and later disdain for the second character, Zenobia, right? A clear and concise thesis, right? And I think it works pretty well here. The thesis itself, right? Maybe that would be an 8 or a 9 level thesis, but if you want to see the explanation for why it wasn't quite an upper range level, you can get the feedback on the entire essay in that previous resource that we already talked about, and it can be found back here, right? There's a video to go with this about the scoring guidelines and so on, right? Let's come back here though. All right. So I want to draw your attention to what this student has done well. The student has done what? Define techniques. You're not using something like through perspective, imagery, and dialogue, right? Let's try to be a little bit more specific, right? A lot of times it's just a matter of slapping a precise adjective before, the syntax you're looking at. Is it choppy syntax, fluid syntax, diction? What kind of diction, right? Here it's first-person perspective, lavish imagery, and probing dialogue. And then we have the claim. The prose establishes, you could also say Hawthorne establishes or suggests, this is the idea I'm going to prove. And it's in response to, right, the prompt, the narrator's initial bewilderment and later disdain for the second character, Zenobia, right? That defines, right, the narrator's attitude towards Zenobia, right? So this thesis has done its job, right? Okay, let's look at 2 more. Here is the 2017 passage, part of the passage at least, and there is the prompt. Again, we're looking closely at the prompt itself, right? And I have front-loaded that prompt right here. Let's take a look at that. In the passage below, from The Adventures of Peregrine Pickle by Smollett, I've not read that, I will confess. Mr. Pickle encounters Godfrey Gauntlet, the brother of his beloved Amelia. Consider how the two men confront their own uncontrolled emotions and yet attempt to abide by their social norms. In a well-developed essay, analyze how the author explores the complex interplay between emotions and social propriety in the passage. You may wish to consider such literary techniques as dialogue, narrative pace, and tone, right? Again, we are going through this just so you can see how we have this word appearing again and again. How? What does how mean? How means techniques, as we've talked about. In this case, they tell you the kinds of techniques you might want to look at, right? Techniques such as dialogue, narrative pace, and tone, right? But you're not just laundry listing techniques, right? You're connecting how these techniques underscore some kind of idea. In this case, this notion of the complex interplay between emotions and social propriety, right? So the structural model through whatever defined techniques you'll examine, the author reveals, right, what you pinpoint as the complex interplay between emotions and social propriety in the passage. Okay, with that in mind, right, what might that look like? And here's the thesis of another student scored a 7, again, upper mid-range, not the highest level, but the second highest level, so above average on this prompt, right? Let's take a look at it. Smollett uses quick dialogue and a hurried narrative pace to demonstrate the conflict between Peregrine and Godfrey's heated anger and acting within social norms, revealing how society's rules governing behavior hinder and help people from acting on natural instincts. Again, maybe you might think a little wordy, right? Yeah, maybe it is, right? But there's still a clear sense of, okay, these are techniques that the student's going to look at, and here is a clear claim that responds to what we're asking him or her to examine in the passage, right? So breaking this down again, right? Notice the techniques that have been highlighted: quick dialogue and a hurried narrative pace, right? And notice that there's been a attempt to define those techniques, right? Not just dialogue, but quick dialogue, a hurried narrative pace, right? And then the claim comes here, a little bit lengthy. We can probably agree upon that, but nonetheless, it gets at the prompt, right? The prompt is asking you to pinpoint how techniques underscore the complex interplay between emotions and social propriety. Here, the student has articulated her response to that. Okay. One more. Here is part of the prompt. Here's the prompt itself for the 2016, right? Let's take a look at it. I've front-loaded it here, right? In this excerpt from Thomas Hardy's The Mayor of Casterbridge, Michael Henchard and his daughter Elizabeth Jane are reunited after years of estrangement. And that's very typical. You know, that's all the background you need to know. Do they expect you to have read this novel? No, right? I bet most students taking this test have not read The Mayor of Casterbridge. Maybe some have. Thomas Hardy's got some fantastic novels. Maybe some AP teachers will teach that in their classes, but most probably will not have read it. You don't have to have read it. Don't worry about it. During the separation, Henchard has risen from poor seasonal farmer, change that, seasonal farm worker, to wealthy mayor of a small country town, while Elizabeth supported herself by waiting on tables. So here, all of this is the background. That's all you need to know, right, about it. All right, read the passage carefully, paying particular attention to tone, word choice, and selection of detail. Compose a well-written essay in which you analyze Thomas Hardy's complex portrayal of the complex relationship between the two characters. Right. So first of all, you might have noticed, wait, where is how? I don't see the word how. It is implied, though, isn't it, right, in this piece, right? Paying particular attention to these things, right? Focus on these techniques or these devices or these, you want to call them textual elements, right? In other words, how does the author use these things here, right, as he goes through it, right? Okay, compose a well-written essay in which you analyze what, right? This is what you need to explore, right? Hardy's portrayal of the complex relationship. You have to define what that is, right? So, structural model for a thesis. Through, again, the defined techniques to examine. Hardy reveals or underscores or illustrates or suggests, right? Whatever purpose verb you want to use, what you pinpoint as the complex relationship between the two characters. I use Hardy here. You can say the passage reveals, the passage indicates, right? However you want to do it. So again, a sample thesis. Here's the thesis of a student scored a 9, right? Upper range level on this, right? Let's take a look at it. Between Henchard's verbal aggressions and his shift towards icy verbal neglect, even as Elizabeth Jane changes her behavior to please him, the passage suggests that the father and daughter have been physically united. They largely remain estranged on an emotional level. Okay. Two-part thesis, right? The two parts that we're always looking for, which are what? What are you looking at about the text, and what does the text suggest? And notice tone, word choice, selection of detail. You don't even have to say the words tone or word choice or selection of details. Notice how deftly the student has pinpointed what he or she wants to focus on, what they want to focus on. Henchard's verbal aggressions, okay? And that would be tone, right? Verbal aggressions. And his shift towards icy verbal neglect. I'm going to look at those two things, right? And you can say that those are two sort of tonal issues, right? So it seems that the writer here has split up tone into two different kinds of tone, if you will, right? Which is great. You know, you picked one of the techniques and you've kind of defined them into two discrete chunks. And then we have, again, the larger meaning piece, if you will, right, as the second part of the thesis. The passage suggests that the father and daughter have been physically united; they remain largely estranged on an emotional level, right? That's the complex relationship, right? They've been physically reunited, but they're emotionally estranged, right? So that makes it complex. What you don't say is this passage suggests the complex relationship between two characters, right? At that point, you have punted. You haven't addressed it. You haven't defined what you think the complex relationship is between them. You want to define that, right, as the claim. Okay. All right, fantastic. Let's go back now and just quickly cover what we would like you to complete in advance of this prose analysis workshop. Just as you did for the poetry, in preparation for the poetry one, we want you to write either full essay responses or detailed outline responses to the below two prose analysis prompts. This first one is, most of them are drawn from novels, right? So this is from a novel, but sometimes they're going to throw a play at you. This is from an Oscar Wilde play, and they want to see how well you can read plays. Both are considered prose, right? For the full responses, take 40 minutes each, right? Again, always take about 10 minutes or 15 minutes to read the prompt and read the poem and map out what you want to say, and then feverishly write your 4 to 6 paragraphs, right? And then for detailed outline responses, if you'd rather do that, that's fine too. Take about 20 minutes or so to read, annotate the poem, hammer out a thesis statement, provide topic sentences for your 2 or 3 body paragraphs, indicate the evidence you're going to use. Just have some stuff, do some work in advance of this this workshop. Okay, stop the share here. All right, that concludes the Prose overview video. The next video is going to deal with the open prompt